The autumn leaves crunched beneath her worn boots as Cordelia walked the tree-lined path to the village, unaware that 12 miles away, a duke was reading her father's name in a forgotten promise, and that this single discovery would unravel everything she believed about her future. Welcome, my beloved. Before we dive into the whole story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into it. Cordelia Hargrove had stopped counting birthdays after 30. There seemed little point when each one arrived like a tolling bell, marking not celebration, but surrender. 31, 32, 33, 34 each year. Another layer of invisibility settling over her shoulders, like the lavender shawl she wore. Faded from years of washing, appropriate for a woman in perpetual half-mourning. The village of Millbrook knew her story by heart. Poor dear, they whispered behind teacups. Lost her betrothed just weeks before the wedding. Never quite recovered, did she? And now, with her mother dying, what will become of her? Too old to marry. Too poor to matter. Too proud to beg. The whispers didn't wound her anymore. She'd built immunity to them the way one builds immunity to cold through repeated, numbing exposure. This particular October morning smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Cordelia carried a basket of remedies to Mrs. Henley, whose arthritis worsened with the damp. The path through the woods was shorter than the road, and she preferred the solitude. Trees didn't judge. They simply shed their leaves and prepared for winter, year after year, without complaint. Her mother had taken a turn last night. Dr. Whitby had been gentle in his prognosis, but his meaning was clear. Weeks, perhaps, maybe days. The house they'd lived in for 30 years was mortgaged beyond redemption. Her father, dead 5 years now, had been generous to a fault, lending money he couldn't spare, helping clients who couldn't pay. The gesture had been noble. The consequences were less so. Cordelia wasn't afraid of poverty exactly. She was afraid of pity, of becoming the village charity case, the spinster who lost everything. She'd rather disappear entirely than endure that particular humiliation. She was so lost in thought she nearly collided with a man standing in the middle of the path. "Forgive me," she said automatically, stepping aside. Then, she actually looked at him. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes the color of winter storms. His coat was impeccably tailored, his boots polished to a shine that seemed almost offensive in the muddy woodland. Everything about him screamed wealth and privilege, from the cut of his jaw to the way he stood as if the world would naturally rearrange itself to accommodate him. And he was staring at her. Not the way men usually looked at women they found attractive. Not even the way they looked at women they found plain. He was studying her face with an intensity that made her cheek burn, as if searching for something he'd lost and hoped to find in her features. "Miss Hargrove?" His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge of something she couldn't quite identify. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, which made no sense because she'd never seen this man in her life. "Yes?" Cordelia's grip tightened on her basket. Instinct whispered. Warning's wealthy men didn't appear in country woods without reason, and that reason was rarely good for women like her. "I am Alaric Thornley." He said it as if the name should mean something. When her expression remained blank, he added, "The Duke of Thornley." The Duke. The Duke? Cordelia's mind scrambled. She'd heard of him, of course. Everyone had. The most eligible bachelor in England, the man who'd mysteriously refused to remarry despite 16 years of widowhood and relentless pursuit by every ambitious family in society. And he was standing in her woods, knowing her name, looking at her as if she were a ghost. "Your Grace." She dipped into a curtsy that felt rusty from disuse. "I'm afraid. I don't understand." Your father once performed a service for mine," Alaric said. His voice was carefully neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. A rather significant one. "My father made certain promises in return. Promises I intend to honor." Cordelia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "I mean, Miss Hargrove, that you are not as alone as you believe yourself to be." He took a step closer, and she caught the scent of sandalwood and something else, leather, perhaps, or the lingering smell of a gentleman's study. "I've come to discuss your future." "My future?" The laugh escaped before she could stop it, bitter and sharp. "Your Grace, I'm 34 years old. Society has made its judgment quite clear. I have no future, only an ending." Something shifted in his expression. The formal mask cracked, revealing raw understanding beneath. "Then, we have something in common," he said quietly. "I stopped believing in futures 3 years ago." The words hung between them in the golden autumn light. Two strangers united by loss, separated by every conceivable circumstance, standing on a woodland path where their worlds should never have intersected. Cordelia's heart was beating too fast. This made no sense. Dukes didn't appear in country villages to discuss the futures of impoverished spinsters. Yet here he stood, real and solid, looking at her not with pity but with something far more dangerous. Recognition, as if he saw in her something no one else had bothered to look for. "Walk with me," Alaric said, and it wasn't quite a command, not quite a request. "There are things we need to discuss." Cordelia's practical nature warred with curiosity as she fell into step beside the Duke. The path widened here, allowing them to walk side by side, though she maintained a proper distance. His presence seemed to fill the entire woods, making the familiar landscape feel strange and new. "My father kept meticulous records," Alaric began, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "During my recent review of his papers, I discovered correspondence with your father regarding a property dispute. Without his intervention, my family would have lost half our holdings to a fraudulent claim. My father wrote that he owed Mr. Hargrove a debt that could never be fully repaid." "Papa never mentioned it," Cordelia said softly. The basket hung heavy on her arm, a reminder of the mundane reality she inhabited so far removed from ducal estates and legal dramas. "He wouldn't have. From what I gather, your father was a man of extraordinary discretion." Alaric glanced at her, and she felt the weight of his gaze. "My father promised that should your family ever need assistance, the Thornley family would provide it without hesitation or condition." Cordelia stopped walking. "Your Grace, if you've come to offer charity, I've come to honor a debt." His interruption was firm, but not unkind. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She met his eyes directly, pride flaring hot in her chest. "Because from where I stand, it looks remarkably similar to pity. And I may be poor, Your Grace, but I am not yet desperate enough to accept handouts from strangers, regardless of how nobly they're packaged." A smile ghosted across his lips, the first break in his formal demeanor. "You have your father's spirit, I see. He wrote in similarly blunt terms when my father attempted to pay him for his services. He refused every penny. Then perhaps you should honor his wishes and mine, and leave me to manage my own affairs." Even as she said it, Cordelia knew the absurdity. What affairs? A dying mother, a mortgaged house, and a future so bleak it barely warranted the name. Alaric studied her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its formal edge. 3 years ago, I lost my daughter to scarlet fever. She was 15. My wife had died years before, and Rosalind was everything: my purpose, my joy, my reason for drawing breath. When she died, I stopped believing in anything resembling a future. I understood, for the first time, what it meant to be truly alone. The confession struck Cordelia like a physical blow. She saw it then, beneath the privilege and polish, the same hollowness that lived in her own chest. The same bone-deep exhaustion of grief that never quite healed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. "As am I, for your losses." His jaw tightened. "You're betrothed. 6 years ago. William, wasn't it? And now, your mother." The fact that he knew, that he'd researched her life before coming here, should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt oddly validating. Someone had bothered to learn her story, to see her as more than the village spinster. "Why are you really here?" Cordelia asked. "The truth, please, not the noble debt story." Alaric was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "Because I read about you, and I recognized something. A woman society has dismissed, living in the margins, considered too old for the things everyone else takes for granted: love, partnership, a future worth planning for. And I thought perhaps we might be able to help each other." "Help each other how?" "I need a wife," he said bluntly. "Not for love, or passion, or any of the romantic notions society pretends to value. I need a wife to manage my household, to stop the relentless pursuit of ambitious mothers, to give me peace. And you need security, a home, protection from poverty, and pity." Cordelia's breath caught. "You're proposing marriage? To me? You've known me for all of 10 minutes. I'm proposing a practical arrangement between two people who understand loss and have no illusions about romance. You would have financial security, social position, freedom to live as you choose. I would have peace and an end to society's expectations. We would both have companionship, if we wanted it, and privacy when we didn't." It was the most cold-blooded, practical, utterly logical proposal Cordelia had ever heard. And somewhere beneath her shock, a tiny voice whispered, "Why not?" "This is insane," she said aloud. "Perhaps, but is it any more insane than the alternatives?" Alaric's expression remained steady. "I've spent 3 years being told I must move on, must find a young bride to give me an heir, must perform the elaborate dance of courtship with girls who could be my daughter's age. You've spent 6 years being told you're too old, too damaged, too unmarriageable. What if we simply refuse to accept what they tell us?" "You don't know me," Cordelia protested, even as something in her chest opened like a door long sealed. "I know enough. You're kind, Mrs. Henley's remedies prove that. You're proud you just rejected a duke's offer of help. You're honest you've challenged me more in 10 minutes than most people dare in a lifetime. And you understand grief in a way that someone who hasn't lost everything never could." The autumn sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light across his face. In that moment, Duke Alaric Thornley looked less like an aristocrat and more like a man who'd fought his way through darkness and emerged scarred but standing. "I need to think," Cordelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. I'm staying at the inn in Millbrook. Send word when you've decided." He reached into his coat and withdrew a card. "But Miss Hargrove? Don't take too long. From what I understand, your circumstances are rather pressing." He was right. Damn him. Her mother had weeks at most. The mortgage payments were already months overdue. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Alaric tipped his hat and walked past her, back toward the village. Cordelia stood frozen. the card burning in her hand. Her entire world tilted on its axis. A duke wanted to marry her, not despite her age, her poverty, her grief, but perhaps because of it. Cordelia delivered Mrs. Henley's remedies in a daze, barely hearing the elderly woman's grateful chatter. Her mind kept circling back to Alaric's words, his proposition, the impossible choice now laid before her. Marriage to a duke. The phrase sounded like something from a novel, not her life. Yet his offer hadn't felt romantic or fantastical. It had felt strangely honest, two damaged people proposing a practical solution to their respective problems. She returned home to find her mother awake, propped against pillows that seemed to swallow her diminishing frame. Agnes Hargrove had once been beautiful, vivacious, full of laughter. Now she was translucent, her skin paper-thin, her breath rattling. "You look troubled, darling," her mother said. Voice weak, but still sharp with maternal intuition. Cordelia sat on the edge of the bed, taking her mother's frail hand. It seemed cruel to burden a dying woman with such a decision, yet she desperately needed counsel. "I met someone in the woods today," she began carefully. "Duke Alaric Thornley." Her mother's eyes widened. "The Duke? Here?" "He came about Papa. Apparently Papa once saved his family's estates, and the old Duke promised to help us if we ever needed it." Cordelia paused, weighing her words. "Mama, he asked me to marry him." The silence stretched between them. Then, impossibly, her mother laughed, a weak, wheezing sound that turned into a cough. Cordelia helped her sip water until the fit passed. "Forgive me," Agnes said, wiping her eyes. "But that's the most absurd thing I've heard in years. A duke proposing to you? My darling girl, are you certain he wasn't mocking you?" The words stung, even though Cordelia understood their source. Her mother had internalized society's judgments as completely as everyone else. In her world, dukes didn't marry impoverished spinsters. He was quite serious. He wants a practical arrangement, a wife to manage his household, and ward off matchmaking mothers. In return, I would have security, position, a home. "You would have misery," her mother said sharply, with more strength than she'd shown in weeks. "Can you imagine? You, who've spent 6 years in quiet mourning, suddenly thrust into high society. They would eat you alive, my dear, mock you as the desperate old maid who snared a duke through his pity." Each word landed like a stone. Cordelia felt her brief, fragile hope crumbling. "But Mama, what choice do I have? When you're gone, I'll have nothing." "You'll manage somehow. You're resourceful. Perhaps you could become a governess, or a companion to some wealthy widow. There are options that don't require you to humiliate yourself by accepting such a ridiculous proposal." Governess, companion, the respectable paths for impoverished gentlewomen. A life of servitude, of making herself small and grateful, of living on the edges of other people's lives. "What if I don't want to just manage?" Cordelia asked quietly. "What if I want something more?" Her mother's expression softened. "Oh, my darling, I know you do. But we can't always have what we want. Sometimes we must accept our place in the world." After her mother drifted back to sleep, Cordelia sat in the garden as dusk fell. The roses needed pruning. The herbs had gone wild. The whole plot reflected the slow decay of their circumstances. In the fading light, she pulled out Alaric's card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. Duke Alaric Thornley, Thornley Manor. What must it be like, she wondered, to live in a world where your name meant something, where doors opened instead of closing, where age was distinguished rather than dismissible. A practical arrangement, he'd called it. No illusions about love or romance. Just two people helping each other survive. Her mother's words echoed. They would eat you alive. But another voice whispered back. You're already being eaten alive by poverty and pity. At least this way, you'd have armor. Cordelia thought of Alaric's eyes when he'd mentioned his daughter, that flash of raw grief that mirrored her own. He understood loss. He wouldn't expect her to perform happiness or pretend the past hadn't happened. There was freedom in that, wasn't there? In being seen as you actually were? The next morning, she hired a boy to deliver her message to the inn. I accept your proposal. When would you like to discuss terms? The reply came within an hour. This afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll come to you. Cordelia spent the morning in a frenzy of cleaning that Mrs. Pepper, their housekeeper of 20 years, watched with raised eyebrows. A duke coming here? Mrs. Pepper repeated for the third time, as if saying it might make it more believable. To this house? He's seen worse, I'm sure, Cordelia said, though she wasn't sure at all. The drawing room's wallpaper was faded, the furniture shabby, the carpet worn thin in places. Their poverty wasn't quite destitution, but it was close enough to make her cheeks burn with shame. At precisely 2 o'clock, Alaric's carriage arrived, a gleaming black affair that looked wildly out of place in front of their modest house. The village would be buzzing by nightfall. Cordelia received him in the drawing room, wearing her best dress, a gray silk from before her father's death that she'd altered twice to keep it fashionable. Beside Alaric's immaculate tailoring, she felt like a mouse trying to pass as a swan. Miss Hargrove. He bowed, and she curtsied, and for a moment they were strangers again, formal and distant. Your Grace, please, sit. He folded his tall frame into her father's old armchair, looking absurdly large in the modest space. Missus. Pepper brought tea with shaking hands, clearly overwhelmed by having a duke in her kitchen's domain. When they were alone, Alaric said, I'm glad you accepted. I wasn't certain you would. I wasn't certain I would either, Cordelia admitted. But my mother is dying, and I'm facing destitution. And pride seems rather pointless under the circumstances. It's not just about escaping destitution, though, is it? His gray eyes studied her. If it were only that, you could find other solutions. You've clearly never tried to find respectable work as an aging spinster, Cordelia said dryly. The positions that would have been available at 25 vanish by 30. I'm too old to be a governess. Families want young, energetic women. Too educated to be a maid. Too poor to be anyone's companion. I exist in a strange limbo where I'm not quite suitable for anything. Yet you hesitated before accepting my offer. Why? Because I'm terrified, she thought. Because this feels like selling myself. Because I don't know if I can bear another loss. And marrying you would mean caring about someone again. My mother thinks society will mock me, she said instead. The desperate spinster who trapped a duke. Society will gossip regardless. They always do. Alaric leaned forward slightly. But I want to be clear about what I'm offering. Miss Hargrove. This would be a real marriage. In legal terms, you would be Duchess of Thornley, with all the rights and protections that entails. But in practical terms, it would be a partnership, separate bedrooms, mutual respect, freedom to pursue our own interests. No expectation of. Cordelia felt her face heat. No, I have no need of heirs. My cousin will inherit the title eventually, and he's welcome to it. What I need is peace. A well-run household. Someone who won't simper or scheme or try to change me. It should have felt cold, this transaction stripped of sentiment. Instead, Cordelia felt oddly reassured. At least, he was honest. And what would you need from me, specifically? She asked. Manage the household staff, act as hostess when necessary, attend the occasional social function. Not often. I'm rather hermit-like these days. Beyond that, your time would be your own. Read, garden, pursue whatever interests you please. You'd have access to my library, which is extensive, an allowance for personal expenses, complete financial security. It sounds too good to be true. Perhaps it is. Perhaps we'll discover we can't stand each other and regret this decision within a month. Alaric's mouth quirked. But we might also discover that companionship between two honest people is more valuable than society's romantic fantasies. Cordelia poured more tea, buying time to think. Your Grace, if we're to be married, you should call me Alaric. Alaric. The name felt strange on her tongue. Why haven't you remarried before now? Surely in 16 years, you've had countless opportunities. His expression shuddered. Because every woman I've met has wanted something from me. A title, wealth, social advancement. Even those claiming to love me loved the idea of being a duchess more than they loved the man. After Rosalind died, I stopped pretending to care about finding love. I just wanted silence. And yet you're proposing to marry me. Won't I disturb your silence? You might. But I suspect you understand the difference between companionship and demands, between presence and intrusion. He set down his cup. I'm proposing we try, Miss Hargrove. A brief engagement, say. A month during which we get to know each other better. If either of us decides we've made a terrible mistake, we can part ways quietly. No harm done. Except to my already questionable reputation, which is precisely why I'm prepared to settle a substantial sum on you, regardless of whether the marriage proceeds. Think of it as payment for your time and the risk to your reputation. It was all so coldly practical. So unlike every girlhood fantasy Cordelia had once harbored about love and marriage, yet something about his directness appealed to her. No pretense. No games. Just two damaged people making a rational choice. 1 month, she said slowly. To see if we can tolerate each other. Precisely. And if we proceed with the marriage, separate bedrooms and mutual respect. Yes. Then I accept your terms. Cordelia extended her hand. And after a moment's surprise, Alaric shook it. His palm was warm. Slightly calloused, he wasn't just an ornamental aristocrat, then. He worked his land. Excellent. I'll have my solicitor draw up the contracts. In the meantime, perhaps you'd consider coming to Thornley Manor tomorrow? See the place before you commit to living there. Is it very grand? Cordelia asked, suddenly nervous. It's large. And old. And rather gloomy, if I'm honest. But it has a spectacular library and gardens that haven't been properly tended in years. I thought you might have opinions about the gardens. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Was that humor? The faintest hint of warmth in those winter eyes? I do have opinions about gardens, she admitted. Then we'll get along splendidly. Alaric stood, and she rose with him. Until tomorrow, then. I'll send the carriage at 10. After he left, Cordelia sat in the drawing room, staring at her hand, the hand that had just shaken a duke's, sealing an impossible bargain. Mrs. Pepper appeared in the doorway, wringing her apron. Well? What happened? I'm engaged, Cordelia said, and started laughing. Mrs. Pepper. I'm engaged to a duke. It's absolutely mad. Mad indeed, Mrs. Pepper muttered. But miss, if you don't mind my saying, he looked at you like you were real. Not many folks do that anymore. Real. Yes. That was it exactly. Alaric saw her, truly saw her, not as the village spinster or the charity case, or the woman too old for love, just as herself. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Thornley Manor rose from the countryside like something from a dream or a Gothic novel, depending on one's perspective. Stone turrets pierced the morning mist, ivy crawled up ancient walls, and windows gleamed like watchful eyes across 3 sprawling stories. Cordelia pressed her face to the carriage window, simultaneously awed and terrified. This would be her home. These grounds, these walls, this impossible grandeur. The driver helped her down, and a butler materialized elderly, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that revealed nothing. "Miss Hargrove, His Grace is expecting you in the library. This way, please." The entrance hall alone was larger than her entire house. A grand staircase swept upward. Portraits of Thornley ancestors lined the walls, and her footsteps echoed on marble floors. Cordelia felt profoundly out of place, a sparrow in a hawk's nest. The library made her forget her nerves entirely. It was magnificent, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, thousands of volumes, comfortable chairs scattered near windows, the smell of leather and old paper and possibility. If she could spend her days here, Cordelia thought, she could bear anything else. "I thought that might be your reaction." Alaric's voice came from a leather chair near the fireplace. He closed the book he'd been reading and stood. In shirt sleeves and waistcoat, without his formal coat, he looked younger. "It's extraordinary," Cordelia breathed. "It was my daughter's favorite room. She used to hide up in the gallery." He pointed to the 2nd level and read for hours. Pain flickered across his face. "I haven't changed anything. Her books are still there, her favorite chair, even her bookmarks." "Like a shrine," Cordelia said softly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm just a coward who can't bear to let go." She walked closer, studying his face. "Grief doesn't make you a coward. Sometimes holding on is the bravest thing we can do." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, the acknowledgement of shared wounds. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" Alaric asked, his voice slightly rough. The tour took over an hour. Drawing rooms that could host 50 people. A dining hall with a table long enough for 30. Bedrooms she lost count of. Servants' quarters, kitchens, storage rooms. A music room with a grand piano gathering dust. It was overwhelming, magnificent, and somehow desperately sad, all this space built for a large, vibrant family, now occupied by one lonely man and his ghosts. "This would be your room," Alaric said, opening a door to a suite that overlooked the gardens. "If you choose to stay? I mean, it connects to the Duchess's chambers, hasn't been used since my mother died 20 years ago." The room was beautiful but neglected. Dust covers over furniture, curtains drawn against the light. With the right attention, though, it could be lovely. Cordelia walked to the window and gasped. The gardens stretched below, wild and untended, but glorious in their autumn decay. Rose bushes ran riot. Herbs had escaped their beds. Ancient fruit trees dropped unpicked apples onto overgrown grass. It was chaos, but she could see the bones of something extraordinary beneath the neglect. "What happened here?" she asked. Alaric joined her at the window. "My wife Anne designed these gardens. After she died, I couldn't bear to maintain them properly. Then Rosalind loved them. Spent hours here. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at them at all. The staff does minimal work, but mostly they've gone wild. It's heartbreaking," Cordelia whispered. "All this beauty, abandoned. Rather like its owner," Alaric said with dark humor. She turned to him. Is that what you think? That you're abandoned? I think I abandoned myself 3 years ago. Let grief turn me into something half alive. He looked at her directly. You understand that, don't you? The feeling of going through motions without really living? Yes. The word came out raw. After William died, I stopped believing in futures, just survived each day, then the next, then the next. 6 years of simply existing. What changed? Why accept my proposal? Cordelia considered lying, offering some practical explanation. But he'd been honest with her. She owed him the same courtesy. Because you looked at me and saw a person, not a problem. Because this arrangement, however strange, feels more honest than anything society has offered me. And because, she hesitated. Because, I think, maybe we could help each other learn how to live again. Not just survive, but actually live. Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then, would you like to walk the gardens with me? They descended through French doors and stepped into controlled chaos. The air smelled of decay and growth, intermingled rotting apples and fresh earth and flowers stubbornly blooming despite neglect. Anne designed it in sections. Alaric explained, leading her down an overgrown path. Formal roses here, herbs there, wildflowers in that meadow, the orchard beyond. She had grand plans, a maze, a water feature, a glass conservatory. She died before most of it was completed. But the roses were her achievement, Cordelia said, looking at the masses of blooms in shades of pink, red, white, and gold. They're spectacular, even untended. They're hardy, rather like their creator. Alaric's voice held fondness and grief in equal measure. Anne was delicate in appearance, but iron underneath. She survived difficult childbirths, harsh winters, my father's disapproval of our love match. The roses were her rebellion, beautiful but thorned, impossible to ignore. They walked in companionable silence, Cordelia's mind already planning. These roses needed pruning, feeding. The herbs could be salvaged. The orchard wanted attention. It would be months of work, maybe years. But she could restore this garden to glory. You're already planning, aren't you? Alaric asked, amusement coloring his tone. I can't help it. Gardens are like children, they thrive on attention and wither from neglect. Yours has been neglected too long. As have I, he admitted. Tell me, Miss Hargrove Cordelia, what would you do with this mess? She stopped walking, surveying the garden with a critical eye. Start with the roses. They're the foundation. Prune them properly. Feed them. Mulch for winter. Then tackle the herb garden. Many of those plants are medicinal, valuable. The orchard needs attention but can wait until spring. And that meadow, she pointed to an area completely overgrown. That could be extraordinary with the right wildflowers. Native species, things that attract butterflies and bees. You've given this considerable thought in approximately 10 minutes. I told you I have opinions about gardens. Cordelia smiled, and realized it felt strange. How long since she'd genuinely smiled? Alaric smiled back, and the transformation was remarkable. The stern Duke vanished, revealing glimpses of the man beneath someone who'd once laughed easily, loved deeply, lived fully. This could work, he said quietly. You and I. This strange arrangement. Don't you think? Cordelia looked at the wild garden, the ancient manor, the complicated man beside her, all broken in different ways, all possibly redeemable. Yes, she said. I think it could. They stood there as the afternoon light gilded everything gold, two damaged souls considering the possibility of healing, surrounded by a garden that stubbornly bloomed despite years of abandonment. Perhaps that was hope, Cordelia thought. the stubborn insistence on blooming anyway. The month of their engagement passed in a strange blur. Alaric visited Millbrook 3 times weekly, taking tea with Cordelia, while her mother dozed upstairs. They talked about everything and nothing: books, politics, gardening, grief, not love, never love. That topic remained unmentioned by mutual consent, a ghost they both pretended not to see. Society, predictably, exploded with gossip. "Mrs. Talbot actually asked if I'd bewitched you," Cordelia reported one afternoon, trying not to laugh. "Apparently at my age, only supernatural intervention could explain your interest." Alaric's expression darkened. "Mrs. Talbot is a tedious woman, with tedious opinions. Ignore her." "I've been ignoring people's opinions for 6 years. I'm quite practiced." She poured more tea, noting how comfortable these afternoons had become. He no longer felt like a stranger, more like, what? A friend, perhaps. An ally. "Have you told your mother about the wedding plans?" he asked carefully. Cordelia's hand stilled on the teapot. "She's too ill to attend. Dr. Whitby says she has days now. Perhaps a week. She still thinks I'm making a terrible mistake." "Does she?" "She thinks I'll be miserable as a duchess. That society will mock me, that I'm selling myself for security." Cordelia met his eyes. "Am I? Are you?" He countered. "I don't know. Some days this feels like salvation. Other days it feels like cowardice, running from poverty into a different kind of prison." She set down the teapot. "Do you ever question this decision?" "Constantly." Alaric's honesty was refreshing, if not reassuring. "But then I think about returning to Thornley alone, facing another winter in that empty house, and this seems preferable. We may not have love, Cordelia, but we have honesty. That's more than most marriages can claim. Honesty and spectacular libraries. The 2 essential ingredients for happiness, clearly." They laughed together, and Cordelia realized how natural it felt now. This easy companionship. She'd expected awkwardness, strain, the constant effort of performing for someone who was essentially a stranger. Instead, Alaric felt increasingly like someone she'd known for years. Her mother died 3 days later, slipping away peacefully in her sleep. Cordelia held her hand, whispered goodbye, and felt the last tether to her old life finally break. At the funeral, Alaric stood beside her while the village watched and whispered. His presence was both comfort and spectacle, the Duke honoring the deceased spinster's mother. How novel, how strange, how wonderfully scandalous. "Do you think this is what brought us together?" Cordelia asked him later, as they walked back to her soon-to-be former home. "Grief? Is that all we have in common?" "I think grief opened us to possibilities we'd have otherwise dismissed," Alaric said carefully. "But, no, I don't think it's all we share. You're intelligent, sharp-witted, kind." Despite her sorrow, Cordelia smiled. "And you're honorable, honest to a fault, surprisingly funny when you forget to be ducal. You have opinions about parliamentary procedure that I find oddly endearing." "Do you?" He looked genuinely pleased. "Most people find my political discussions tedious. Most people are tedious themselves." They reached her house. No, not her house anymore. Tomorrow she would move to Thornley Manor. The wedding was planned for the following week, a small ceremony in the Manor's chapel with minimal fuss. No white dress, no grand celebration. Just a legal ceremony, binding 2 practical people in practical partnership. "Are you ready?" Alaric asked, studying her face. "We could delay, if you need more time to grieve." "No." Cordelia's voice was firm. "Mama is gone, and staying in this house alone won't bring her back. I want to move forward." I need to. Then tomorrow I'll send the carriage. Mrs. Sheffield, my housekeeper, has prepared your rooms. And Cordelia? He took her hand, the gesture still awkward between them. I'm sorry for your loss. Truly. Thank you. She squeezed his fingers, feeling the warmth of human connection. For everything. You didn't have to do any of this. Perhaps I did. Perhaps we both needed this. A chance to start again. After he left, Cordelia walked through the empty house one final time. Every room held memories: her father's study where he'd taught her to read, the kitchen where her mother had baked, the garden where William had proposed all those years ago. But memories, she was learning, could be carried anywhere. They lived in the heart, not in rooms. Tomorrow she would become a duchess. The thought still seemed absurd, impossible, like a story happening to someone else. But it was real. She was choosing this, choosing possibility over resignation, companionship over solitude, life over mere existence. If that wasn't love, at least it was hope. And hope, after 6 years of darkness, it felt revolutionary. Thornley Manor transformed over the next week as Cordelia settled in. Mrs. Sheffield, initially wary of the new duchess, thawed when Cordelia asked her advice on household matters rather than issuing commands. The staff, long accustomed to their master's grief-stricken isolation, watched cautiously as she moved through rooms, opening curtains, rearranging furniture, letting light back into spaces that had been dark for years. You're making changes, Alaric observed one evening, finding her in the drawing room where she'd removed the dust covers and added fresh flowers. Does it bother you? Cordelia asked, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't her house, not really, not yet. No. It's refreshing. I've been living in a mausoleum. Perhaps it's time for resurrection. He settled into a chair, looking less formal than usual in his evening clothes. The wedding is tomorrow. Are you nervous? Terrified, she admitted. Not of marrying you, oddly enough, but of everything it represents. Becoming a duchess, managing this enormous house, facing society. I'm a country nobody, Alaric. I don't know how to be what everyone will expect. Then don't be what they expect. Be yourself. That's all I'm asking for. But what if myself isn't enough? He leaned forward, expression intent. Cordelia, listen to me. You are not what society labeled you. You're not too old, not too broken, not too anything. You're a woman of intelligence and strength who survived loss and poverty with dignity intact. That is more than enough. More than I deserve, frankly. The words pierced something in her chest, finding vulnerabilities she'd thought sealed. You really believe that? I wouldn't have asked you to marry me otherwise. They sat in silence as firelight danced across the room. Tomorrow they would speak vows, sign documents, become husband and wife in legal fact. But tonight, they were still just two people, learning to trust each other with their wounds. Tell me about Anne, Cordelia said impulsively. Your first wife. I should know about her, shouldn't I? Alaric's face went carefully blank. Why? Because she was important to you. Because her memory lives in this house, in the gardens, in your grief. Because I'm not trying to replace her or compete with a ghost, but I should understand who she was. He was quiet so long she thought he might refuse. Then, she was lovely, laughing, bright, full of life. We married young against my father's wishes. She was gentry, not aristocracy. He considered her beneath me. We were happy, desperately in love, the way young people are. Then she became pregnant, and it nearly killed her. The doctors warned against another child, but she wanted Rosalind to have siblings. She died, bringing them into the world, and the baby with her. I'm so sorry. The worst part is, I was angry with her. For years, I was furious that she'd risked everything despite the warnings, that she'd left me alone with a motherless daughter. Terrible, isn't it? Blaming her for dying. It's human, Cordelia said gently. Grief isn't rational. It lashes out at everyone, including the dead. You understand that because of William. Yes. I was angry with him for dying, for leaving me, as if he'd had any choice in contracting typhoid fever. But grief needs somewhere to go, and often it turns inward or toward the person we've lost. Alaric's eyes were bright with unshed tears. No one else has ever understood that. They all said I should honor her memory, cherish what we had. Nobody acknowledged the anger. Tell me about Rosalind, Cordelia pressed gently. This time he smiled, though it trembled. She was extraordinary. Smart, curious, stubborn as hell. She wanted to be a naturalist, to travel and study birds. Completely improper for a young lady, which delighted me. She called society's rules elaborate nonsense and refused to care about fashion or finding a husband. She sounds wonderful. She was. And then scarlet fever took her in 3 days. One moment she was alive and arguing with me about letting her attend university, a ridiculous idea I was actually considering, and the next she was gone. I couldn't save her. Couldn't do anything but watch her die. Cordelia crossed to him, knelt beside his chair, took his hands. Alaric, look at me. Her death wasn't your fault. You didn't fail her. You loved her. And sometimes love isn't enough to hold back death. That's the cruelest truth we learn. Quote, he gripped her hands tightly, tears finally spilling. I don't know how to live in this world without her. Everything reminds me. Every room, every path in the garden, every book in the library. She's everywhere and nowhere. I know, Cordelia whispered, her own tears falling. I know. They stayed like that, hands clasped, tears mingling, two broken people acknowledging their brokenness. It wasn't romance. It was something raw, more real, shared humanity in the face of unbearable loss. Finally, Alaric pulled back, wiping his face with an embarrassed laugh. This is hardly proper pre-wedding behavior. Nothing about us is proper. Why start now? Fair point. He helped her stand, then surprised her by pulling her into a brief, fierce embrace. Thank you. For understanding. For not expecting me to be something I'm not. Same to you, Cordelia murmured against his shoulder. He smelled of sandalwood and wool, and something indefinably masculine. Not unpleasant. Actually, rather comforting. When they separated, something had shifted between them. Still not love. Neither of them were ready for that precipice. But deeper friendship. Perhaps. True partnership. The recognition that they were allies in this strange journey. Not just convenient strangers. Tomorrow then, Alaric said. Tomorrow, Cordelia agreed. She climbed the stairs to her rooms, already feeling more at home in this grand house than she'd expected. Through her window, the garden sprawled in moonlit wildness, waiting for spring, for attention, for someone to care enough to bring them back to life. Rather like their marriage, she thought. Wild, neglected, but still capable of blooming. They just had to be patient enough, brave enough, to tend what had been left to run feral. Tomorrow she would become a duchess. Tonight she was simply Cordelia, a woman who'd lost everything and was choosing, despite all odds, to try again. The wedding was nothing like the elaborate ceremony Cordelia had imagined as a girl. No white dress or cathedral or hundreds of guests. Just the manor's small chapel, a handful of staff as witnesses, and a rector who rushed through the service with efficient speed. Cordelia wore a simple lavender dress appropriate for a second marriage, for a woman in half-mourning. Alaric wore black, formal and forbidding, until he looked at her and smiled. "Do you take this woman?" the rector intoned. "I do," Alaric said, his voice steady. "Do you take this man?" "I do." Cordelia's voice wavered slightly, the enormity of the moment finally hitting her. She was marrying a duke, becoming a duchess. Everything was changing, had changed, would never be the same. Alaric slid a ring onto her finger, heavy gold, carved with the Thornley crest. It felt foreign, weighty with symbolism and history. "You may kiss the bride." They hadn't discussed this part. Alaric hesitated, then leaned in and kissed her cheek gently, respectfully. It was chaste, appropriate, and somehow disappointing. Not that Cordelia wanted passion from this practical arrangement, but the formal peck felt more like a business transaction than a marriage. But then, wasn't that exactly what this was? The staff applauded politely. Mrs. Sheffield dabbed her eyes. The rector congratulated them and hurried off to his next appointment. And just like that, Cordelia was a duchess. "Well," Alaric said, offering his arm, "that's done." "Very romantic," Cordelia said dryly. "I did warn you this wouldn't be a love match." "You did. Though you might have mentioned the chapel would be freezing, and the rector would race through the vows, as if he had somewhere more important to be." Alaric laughed. "Next time I'll take notes on your preferences. There won't be a next time, I hope. One practical marriage is quite enough." They walked back to the manor through gardens, just beginning to show signs of Cordelia's intervention. She'd spent the past week working alongside the groundskeeper, pruning roses, clearing beds, planning spring plantings. Her hands were scratched and sore, her dress hems perpetually muddy, and she'd never felt more purposeful. A small celebration awaited in the dining room Mrs. Sheffield's doing, not theirs. Cook had prepared a modest wedding breakfast, and champagne sat chilling in silver buckets. "To the Duke and Duchess," Mrs. Sheffield said, raising her glass. The staff echoed the toast, and Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. These people barely knew her, yet they welcomed her with genuine warmth. "To new beginnings," Alaric added, meeting Cordelia's gaze over his glass. "And second chances." "To stubborn hope," Cordelia said impulsively. "And gardens that bloom despite neglect." They drank, and Cordelia tasted possibility on her tongue, bitter and sweet like the champagne. Uncertain, but intoxicating. The day passed in strange domesticity. Alaric disappeared into his study to work. Cordelia returned to the gardens. Unable to sit still despite being newly married. She needed the earth beneath her fingers, the physical labor, the tangible progress of bringing order to chaos. That evening they met for dinner, formal in the ridiculous dining room with its table for 30. "This is absurd," Cordelia said, looking at Alaric seated at the opposite end. "Miles away, down polished wood. We'll need shouting to converse." "I agree. Tomorrow we dine in the breakfast room. Much more reasonable." "Thank God. I thought perhaps this was some ducal tradition, couples maintaining maximum distance at all times. Only the unhappy ones." The comment hung in the air between them. Were they happy? Cordelia didn't know. Content, perhaps. Hopeful. But happy felt like too large a word for this tentative arrangement. After dinner, they retreated to the library, their neutral space, comfortable for both. Alaric read parliamentary reports while Cordelia lost herself in a novel, the silence between them companionable rather than strained. "This is nice," she said eventually. "Simply being together without needing to perform or entertain." Alaric looked up from his papers. "Yes. I'd forgotten how pleasant, quiet companionship could be. Anne used to sit with me like this, while I worked. I missed it after she died, not grand romantic gestures, just the comfort of shared space. William and I used to read poetry together," Cordelia admitted. "He'd take one part, I'd take another, and we'd perform them dramatically. Terrible performances, but we laughed ourselves silly. Tell me one of the poems." So she did. Tennyson, Byron, Wordsworth. The words came back easily. Muscle memory, from younger, happier days. Alaric listened. Really listened. And when she finished, he said, "Your voice is lovely. You should read aloud more often." It was a small compliment, but it warmed her more than it should. How long since anyone had praised her for something beyond mere utility? That night, Cordelia lay in her enormous bed in the Duchess's chambers and considered her wedding day. Not the fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl, but something potentially better, more honest, more real. She and Alaric were building something unusual, but perhaps unusual suited them better than conventional romance ever would. Through the connecting door to his chambers, she heard his footsteps, the sounds of him preparing for bed. They were married, but separate. Partners, but independent. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt strangely right. Tomorrow she would wake as a duchess, begin learning the role she'd never expected to play. But tonight she was simply Cordelia, a woman who'd survived loss and found, against all odds, something resembling peace. That was enough. That was everything. 3 weeks into their marriage, society descended. Lady Ashworth arrived, first, a formidable woman in her 60s, dripping diamonds and disapproval. "I simply had to meet the new Duchess," she announced, sweeping past the butler as if she owned the place. "Such a surprising choice. Your Grace." Alaric's jaw tightened, but he remained polite. "Lady Ashworth. What a pleasure." Cordelia recognized the type immediately: society's gatekeepers, the women who decided who was acceptable and who was not. She'd been dismissed by lesser versions in Millbrook. This was the general of that particular army. "Miss Hargrove, wasn't it?" Lady Ashworth's eyes raked over Cordelia's simple day dress, cataloging every sign of her inferior breeding. "From quite modest circumstances, I understand. How fortunate for you, this sudden elevation." The implication was clear. Fortune hunter, social climber, desperate spinster who'd trapped a duke. Cordelia felt her temper rise, that spark of defiance that had kept her going through 6 years of pity. "Indeed, Lady Ashworth. Though I'd say His Grace was equally fortunate. Not every woman would take on a neglected estate and attempt to restore it to glory." Alaric's mouth twitched, suppressing a smile. She realized. "Restore it?" Lady Ashworth sniffed. "Thornley Manor is one of the finest estates in England." "Was," Cordelia corrected gently. "It had fallen into disrepair through years of grief and neglect. But we're changing that. Would you care to see the gardens? I've been working quite hard on them." She led the older woman outside before she could refuse, ignoring Alaric's surprised look. Let him deal with parliamentary reports. She'd handle society dragons. The gardens, while still wild, showed dramatic improvement. Roses had been properly pruned, beds cleared, paths restored. It was a work in progress, but the bones of greatness were visible again. "You did this yourself?" Lady Ashworth asked, surprise coloring her tone. With the groundskeeper's help, yes. Gardens need attention, affection. They're living things, not just decoration. They walked in silence for several minutes. Then, my daughter runs a charitable society for impoverished gentlewomen. Perhaps you'd consider becoming a patroness? Your position as Duchess would lend considerable weight to the cause. It wasn't friendship, but it was olive branch. Cordelia recognized it for what it was, a test. Would she be a proper Duchess, using her position for good? Or just an interloper focused on her own elevation? I'd be honored, Cordelia said simply. I was nearly an impoverished gentlewoman myself, not long ago. I understand their struggles. Lady Ashworth studied her with sharp eyes. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A desperate creature, grasping and graceless. Instead, I find a woman with dirt under her fingernails and backbone enough to defend her choices. The older woman's lips curved slightly. Perhaps Thornley chose better than society realizes. After Lady Ashworth left, promising to send information about the charity, Cordelia found Alaric in the library, grinning. You handled her brilliantly, he said. Lady Ashworth determines who's acceptable in society. If she's endorsed you, others will follow. I didn't do it for endorsement. I did it because she was rude, and I'm tired of being dismissed. Either way, you've passed society's first test. There will be others, of course. Dinners, balls, social calls. Are you ready for that? Cordelia considered. A month ago, the thought would have terrified her. Now, having faced Lady Ashworth and survived, she felt differently. I'll manage. I'm a duchess now, apparently. Might as well act like one. Not just any duchess. My duchess. Alaric's voice held warmth she'd rarely heard. I'm proud of you, Cordelia. Truly. The words settled into her chest, precious and unexpected. When had anyone last been proud of her? That evening, as they sat in the library, their nightly ritual now, Alaric said suddenly, I think I'm beginning to understand happiness again. Not the wild, passionate joy of youth, but something quieter, more sustainable. Cordelia looked up from her book. What brought this on? You. This. He gestured around them. The house feels alive again. I hear laughter from the kitchens. I wake up with purpose instead of dread. He met her eyes. You've given me that. Not through grand gestures, but through simply being here, being yourself. I've done the same things I've always done. Gardened, read, spoken my mind. Exactly. You haven't tried to fix me or change me or force me into some vision of what I should be. You've just existed alongside me. Let me be broken while also showing me wholeness is possible. Cordelia felt tears threaten. Alaric, I'm not declaring love, he said quickly. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I am declaring gratitude, affection, respect. Is that enough? Can we build a life on that foundation? She thought of society's romantic fantasies, grand passions and declarations, love at first sight and happily ever after. None of that had served her before. Perhaps this quiet affection, mutual respect, shared purpose, was better. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything. He smiled. Truly smiled. And Cordelia realized she was smiling back. Two people society had dismissed as too old, too broken, too late for happiness. Finding it anyway in the most unexpected place. Over the next months, their life together deepened. Cordelia became a formidable duchess, using her position to advocate for causes she cared about: women's education, poverty, relief, agricultural reform. Society, initially skeptical, grew to respect her intelligence and dedication. The whispers changed from desperate fortune hunter to surprisingly accomplished. Alaric returned to Parliament with renewed vigor, his speeches on social reform drawing praise and attention. At home, he laughed more, smiled often, even occasionally joined Cordelia in the gardens, though his contribution was mainly supervisory, which amused them both. They never discussed love. That word remained unspoken, too fraught with history and heartbreak. But they built something perhaps more valuable: true partnership, deep friendship, the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd seen each other's wounds and chosen each other anyway. 1 year after their wedding, Cordelia stood in the restored gardens, surveying her work. Roses bloomed in riots of color. Herbs flourished. The orchard bore fruit. And Anne's wildflower meadow had become a sanctuary for butterflies and bees. The garden, like their marriage, had been brought back from the edge of ruin through patient care and stubborn hope. "Spectacular," Alaric said, coming to stand beside her. "You've performed miracles here." "Not miracles, just attention. Everything thrives when it's properly tended." He took her hand, not a dramatic gesture, but a comfortable one, familiar now. "I was wrong. You know. When I said I didn't believe in futures, you've given me one. Not the one I expected, but perhaps the one I needed." "We've given each other futures," Cordelia corrected. "That was the whole point, wasn't it?" They stood together in the golden afternoon light, two people who'd been told they were too old for happiness, too broken for healing, too late for second chances. Society had been wrong about them, as it was wrong about so many things. Love, when it came, and it had come, quietly, without fanfare, wasn't the passionate whirlwind of youth. It was steadier, deeper, built on foundation of mutual respect and shared pain, and the conscious choice to build something beautiful from broken pieces. "What are you thinking?" Alaric asked. Cordelia smiled, squeezing his hand. "That we're living proof that it's never too late. That society's rules are nonsense. That sometimes the best stories begin not with once upon a time, but with perhaps we should try." That's rather profound for a Thursday afternoon. "I'm a duchess now. We're expected to be profound." He laughed, and she laughed. And in that moment, standing in restored gardens beside a man who'd become her truest friend and deepest love, Cordelia understood that happiness had never been about timing, or age, or society's approval. It had always been about courage. The courage to hope, to try, to choose possibility over resignation. They'd been told they were too old for love. They'd proven everyone wrong simply by refusing to believe them. And that, Cordelia thought, was the most romantic thing of all. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. See you on the next one.